And now, Virgin Most Powerful Radio is pleased to present Hands-On Apologetics with renowned Catholic author and apologist, Gary Michuta.
Welcome, everybody. Hands-On Apologetics. You have entered into Virgin Most Powerful's Apologetics Dojo, and I am Gary Michuta, your host and sensei for today. And this is where the rubber of catechesis meets the road of everyday life. And I know that a lot of states out there are issuing the station in place order. And fortunately, we have a station. It's Virgin Most Powerful Radio. The place is here. And the only thing that you can contract, God willing, is a knowledge of God, a love of God, and the ability to explain and defend our Catholic faith. So welcome aboard, everybody. It's great to be with you today. Got a very interesting show today. For many of you who maybe are dialogue with Orthodox or perhaps even Protestants, there's always this issue of the papacy and councils. Papacy and councils, how do they go together? Can a council overrule the Pope? Is the Pope needed for a valid council? Was the Pope active in every council? Let's say the very first council of the Church, the Council of Nicaea. So to help us look at that issue of the Pope and the Council of Nicaea, I have a person that has done an awful lot of thinking and has done some excellent work studying and evaluating the claims of the papacy, and that is none other than Eric Ybarra, our good friend. And he's going to be coming on the other side of the break and kind of going through all the little details and stuff around what exactly went on at the Council of Nicaea in regards to the Pope and the Council. So that's on the other side of the break. But lest I forget, I want to give my shout-outs to all of you watching a live stream on Facebook and YouTube. Hello, everybody. Greetings to the social media section of the gym, or the dojo, I should say. Let's see. Also, I want to welcome all of you listening on radio around the country and around the world via podcast. Welcome aboard, everybody. I hope everybody's in good health and ready to do some exercises because, as always, we have our critical thinking skills exercise as defining the fallacy, where we find one informal fallacy each episode. And today's finding the fallacy is the circular reasoning fallacy. And we also meet an early church father. Today's a very important early church father. You know, it's kind of ironic that we have Eric Ybarra on because last time he was on the show, we talked about this particular early church father, and that is St. Cyprian of Carthage. So, good stuff. Let's see, what else? As always, you can download programs. Maybe you won't be able to catch the entire program. Or maybe you want to listen to all the great details that Eric is going to download on us today. You can go to our flagship website, which is virginmostpowerfulradio.org. Or you can also access our shows through the handy-dandy phone app on your iPhone. So check it out, folks. If you don't have it, download the app or visit the website. And by the way, for all you in social media land out there, please share the word about us. Tell people about the show. Subscribe, like, ring the bell, toot the horn, do whatever else you do on the computer land. We really appreciate it. All right, so why don't we jump to our finding of the fallacy for today. And the finding of the fallacy is the circular reasoning fallacy, or proving in a circle, or circular logic is some of the aliases under which it goes by. And it's a very simple fallacy. It's basically a logical fallacy in which the reasoner begins with what he or she is trying to end with. Okay? So the components of circular reasoning is often valid because the premises are true, but the conclusion, and the conclusion must be true. The problem is the true premises are what's being proved. So how does circular reasoning go? Basically, it's when you assume the truth of your conclusion and then use that very same assumption as evidence for the conclusion. And hence you go around and around in a circle because you keep ending up concluding with what you're using to prove the conclusion. Circular reasoning is very easy to spot. For me, it actually gives me a little dizziness when you try to follow the logic of a circular argument, because you just keep going around and around in circles. And once you start getting dizzy following somebody's argument, chances are they're arguing in a circle. And the best way to do is just call it out and point out the fact that you can't use the conclusion as part of your premises. Now, sometimes circular reasonings can be very easy to see. Sometimes it's more difficult. And so you have to be careful, because sometimes the conclusion may be rephrased or spoken of in a different way in the premise than in the conclusion. So you got to be careful. A lot of circular reasoning kind of sneaks under the radar because it kind of cloaks that assumption. So just think things through. Go step by step through the argument, and if it's not circular, it should be a nice straight line. If it is circular, then you're going to find out that part of the evidence is actually the conclusion. And that is our finding of the fallacy for today. Circular reasoning fallacy. All right, that was fun. Why don't we jump to the Meet the Early Church Father for today? And that is St. Cyprian of Carthage, who died AD 258. Very important early church father, certainly with apologetics. St. Cyprian, Bishop of Carthage, was often called the African Pope. He was born in Carthage of wealthy pagan parents between the year 200, maybe 210 AD. He was converted to Christianity about the year 246 AD and was raised to the priesthood soon afterwards. In 248, 249, he was made Bishop of Carthage. And when the Diocletian persecution broke out in 250 AD, he found safe refuge in the hills outside the city, from where, in comparative safety, he directed his flock by letters to his clergy. Now, no doubt, Cyprian's actions in this regard, preserving safe refuge for himself, was a very prudent move. However, it also proved to be a great stick in which his opponents could hammer him over the head with, the charge of cowardice or so on. But the fact of the matter is that St. Cyprian of Carthage was no coward. In fact, later he proved himself ready for martyrdom. Let's see. He had to deal with several factions within the church. For example, the reconciliation of the lapsed. In other words, there were some people who repudiated the faith during the time of this brutal persecution. And the question came up, well, how do you reconcile people who have repudiated the faith? Can they come back to the faith? How can they come back to the faith? So one of this faction was a priest named Novatus, who showed his bad faith when breaking with Cyprian, alleged that Cyprian was not easy enough on the lapsed, and he went to Rome and joined a schism known as the Novatians, who was an extreme rigorist in respect to reconciliation of the lapsed, and generally denied that reconciliation is possible entirely. So you have that group that came off. Now, probably in terms of apologetics, Cyprian's probably best known for his relationship with the popes. Now, although Cyprian was on excellent terms with Pope St. Cornelius I, who reigned AD 251-253, he fell out sharply with Cornelius' successor, Pope St. Stephen I, who reigned in 254-256, on the question of rebaptizing of converted heretics. Now, according to Jurgen's Faith of the Early Fathers, it was an immemorial practice or custom in the African Church to regard baptism conferred to heretics as invalid. Baptism conferred by heretics as invalid. And in spite of Stephen's severe warning, Cyprian never yielded. His attitude was simple, that every bishop is responsible for his own actions, answerable to God alone. The dispute was just at a dangerous stage when the edict of Emperor Valerian renewed the persecutory powers or measures against Christians and prevented it from ending in disaster. Stephen was martyred. Pope St. Stephen was martyred in 256 AD, and Cyprian was exiled on August 257 AD. He's beheaded near Carthage on September 14, 258, and he is the first African bishop to die a martyr's death. There's several works of Cyprian that are available. Most of them come by way of letters. And probably one of the most important ones are To the Donatists, which he wrote from AD 246 to 247. The earliest of Cyprian's treaties, he wrote it to a friend, Donatist, not to be confused with the Donatist schism, or the originator of the Donatist schism, but just a friend. And he writes a touching description of the movements of divine grace that led him to his own conversion. It was Catholic, and like I said, the rest is histoire. Most of his writings comes from his letters, and also from what's told about him through other church fathers, especially the great North African church father, Saint Augustine of Hippo. Boy, I got to get my words straight here. Saint Augustine of Hippo speaks highly of Cyprian. So that is our Meet the Early Church Father for today. And coming up on the other side of the break, we're going to be talking about the Papacy and the very first ecumenical council, the Council of Nicaea, with Master Apologist Eric Ybarra. So you want to stay tuned. Lots of great information coming up. Listen to Hands On Apologetics. I'm Gary Machuda, and we'll be right back, folks.
Leviticus 11:44 says, "Consecrate yourselves and be holy, because I am holy." St. Vincent Pallotti said, "You must be holy in the way God asks you to be holy." God does not ask you to be a Trappist monk or a hermit. He wants you to sanctify the world and your everyday life. May God show us the path to holiness and help us to follow it all the days of our life.
Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites the Terry and Jesse Show, and they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow, that's 80%. realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE-US1.
Now, back to Hands On Apologetics with Gary Machuda. If you'd like to join the conversation, call 888-526-2151. Here's Gary.
And welcome back, everybody. Hands On Apologetics. And we're going to talk about Peter and the Papacy, specifically the First Ecumenical Council of Nicaea. What exactly was going on there? Was it the council acting apart from the Pope? Did the Pope play a role at Nicaea? What does it tell us about the papacy? What does it tell us about the authority of that council? And to help us work through all this data, we have our good friend Eric Ybarra back. He blogs through ericYbarra.org, and he's also the co-host, along with Michael Lofton, who was just on a couple of days ago on Reason and Theology. And you can check out all his great stuff now at ericYbarra.org, but also Reason and Theology, all one word.com. And Eric, welcome back to Hands On Apologetics.
Oh, thank you so much, Gary. I'm really happy to be back.
Yeah, I am so glad you are back, because you, my friend, I think you definitely rank in the top 3 people I know in terms of knowledge of the papacy. And since we get a lot of new listeners, I was wondering if maybe you could tell us a little bit about your journey of the faith and how the papacy kind of works into that.
Yeah, so, quickly going through my early childhood, I was raised in the Catholic Church, received the sacraments, but my formation was very poor, mainly due to my disinterest. When I did attend university after high school, I went into university as an atheist, agnostic, and I relied on philosophy for my more objectivist worldview. But having then been confronted by Christian evangelists, I had a powerful conversion experience to Christianity for the first time, really, in my life. And there I spent years in the Protestant Reform world, a very revivalist, Reformed Protestant theology, and did a lot of campus ministry, door-to-door evangelism, bus preaching, went around and, shared the gospel as best as I could and as I knew. But several circumstances led me down the path of history to know where Christianity really stood on, what was the foundation that it all rested on. And this led me first to the Canterbury Trail, as it's called, to the Church of England, which, as your listeners probably know, High Church Anglicanism it claims to be a historic church, retaining some of the basic constitutions of the Christian tradition, but it doesn't stick its neck out all the way in being Roman Catholic or any of the Eastern Orthodox churches or the Oriental Orthodox churches. So it kind of tries to keep this via media, as St. John Henry Newman called it, obtaining history as much as possible, but also sort of cleaning off the more difficult issues. So I was in that world for a while, and as a High Church Anglican, I was comfortable enough to study more of the historical sources, and through many prayers, many hours of contemplation, and many discussions with Orthodox priests and Catholic priests and scholars, I made my way back to the Catholic Church with a conscious commitment and belief in its teachings.
Wow, yeah, that's fascinating. Actually, there's a lot of, I think some of the best material written defending the papacy has come from converts from Anglicanism, especially around the turn of the last century.
That is true, Gary. I agree with that. You have Henry Wilberforce, you have St. John Henry Newman. You also have some unknown names. One in particular is Frederick Kinsman. He was an Episcopal bishop in America, and he has a whole book that he writes on his journey from Anglicanism to Catholicism. It's called Salve Mater. And that book actually adds something that St. John Henry Newman's book on the development of doctrine and the Apologia Sophia does not, and that is Frederick Kinsman actually deals with Eastern Orthodoxy, because at the time the Anglican Church was in dialogue in New York State, where the Anglicans and the Orthodox were in dialogue, ecumenical dialogue. And so if any of your readers want to read one of my prized Anglican historians and clergymen, is Frederick Hinsman. That book I recommend it.
Interesting. Yeah, because the topic for papacy and Nicaea, it's one of those topics that has Protestantism. There's objections that are laid in regards to that, but also Orthodox as well.
Yeah, and Orthodoxy doesn't immediately jump on the radar for a lot of Protestants who are studying history. And the proof of that is if you hear a lot of American converts to Catholicism and their testimonies, before the Reformation, they're thinking of the one undivided church, and they're thinking Catholicism, But, in the last 30 years, for sure, that has changed with Protestant seminaries and really looking into the Orthodox churches. But, as you said before, the Anglican Protestants who were historians, they knew about the Eastern Orthodox for a long time. And in fact, all the way going back to the late 1800s and the 1900s, a lot of the Anglican manuals that were written against the papacy, they would use the Eastern Orthodox, as sort of exemplar of why Catholicism was not necessary and didn't provide the unity that it claims. So, Orthodoxy is one of those items that really need to be considered, and it's a force to reckon with, and I think some of my writings bear that out.
Yeah, and they're great writings, too, by the way. I've learned an awful lot from your research. Before the break comes up, we have a few minutes. Maybe if you could kind of lay out exactly what is the question surrounding the Pope and Nicaea.
Yeah, Gary, for sure. So a lot of Protestant historians, Orthodox historians, when they look at the Council of Nicaea, you have a situation coming up in Egypt where one of the presbyters in the Church of Alexandria is now teaching that there was a time that the Son was not. And so he questioned the co-eternality of the Son, and then that led to all kinds of problems inside the Church of Egypt. Arius, the presbyter, was excommunicated by his bishop, Alexander, and the issue got so great because Arius was a smart man, and he actually convinced a lot of people who were traveling by water. And so the heresy actually got wide into the Roman Empire. Eventually, the emperor at the time, Constantine the Great, wanted to nail this in the bud and bring unity to what he was seeing as his emerging Christian empire. And so you have the Emperor Constantine, you have the Bishop Alexander of Alexandria, you have Arius, and then you have this big Christological controversy that happens in the East, and we never hear about the Pope. And so a lot of people look at this and they're like, well, if the papacy is true, who's knocking on the Pope's door about this, And there's actually a lot of history to unearth about the role of the papacy at this time, but it doesn't hit you in the face with the immediate details of the controversy.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I think, kind of projecting modern view of the papacy back into history, you would think that, the Pope would issue a bull of excommunication and then, perhaps reaffirm the Orthodox doctrine. But you don't, that just, like you said, it doesn't jump off the pages that something like that, actually happens.
Yeah, and, part of that is because not everything that was written down got saved,
right.
But, some of the more prominent writings were collected, and even if they were not collected in their primary integrity, you see citations to it in the other primary documents. But in this case, the Council of Nicaea, the question is, how did it open up? Who called the Council of Nicaea? And a lot of secular historians will be quick to say the emperor called it because, there's a certain narrative that, the secular world kind of made Christianity in the 4th century. So it's a nifty way of trying to play that narrative. But it's true. The Emperor Constantine did call the council, and it was totally correct for him to do that. But the question is, what cooperation with the real governors of the church, meaning the bishops and the Pope in particular, what role did they have in convening the Council of Nicaea? And we know from history after the fact that it's almost indisputable that Pope Sylvester, that's the Pope who was sitting on the throne of Peter at the time, certainly did have a role in convening the council. And the first way we know this, from the Eastern Orthodox perspective anyway, this would not really gain too much weight with the Protestant, is in their office of prayers called the Meneon, which is a calendar of months with all kinds of liturgical services commemorating the saints and historical events. And interestingly enough, the Orthodox see Pope Sylvester as the primary mover in convening the Council of Nicaea. Really? In the Meneon for Pope Sylvester, Eastern Orthodox monasteries, whenever they get to his date of commemoration, they actually call him the father and the hero that drove out the Egyptian heresy, and that he convened the Council of Nicaea. And this Meneon, it is pretty antique. It's not as antique as the Council of Nicaea, of course, but It goes to show how people way off in the East, when they constructed their calendar services, they remembered, and whatever history that they had access to, they saw Sylvester as a prominent figure in the council.
Wow, that's fascinating. So this records the memory of what he did. And like you mentioned before, one of the tricky things about this question is it's almost like we're overhearing a conversation in history. We don't have direct access to a lot of the stuff that happened since, so ancient. So we kind of had to piece it together. So here you have a later document that speaks very highly of the Pope's role in regards to suppressing Arianism. I hear the music, Eric. Actually, that's no place problem. To stop. All right, we're chatting with Master Apologist Eric Ybarra about the Pope and the Council of Nicaea. Stay tuned, folks. Some interesting stuff to come, that's for sure.
Help the Helpless, a Minnesota St. Paul nonprofit organization chaired by Father of Tyr and volunteers, is humbly asking you for your kind support to help the poor and the handicapped children in India and Ecuador. Through financial support from the Help of the Helpless benefactors, the children are provided with clothing, food, education, shelter, and the teachings of the Catholic Church. The mission is to help children thrive and become self-sufficient young adults leading productive lives. We also provide aid to poor families in Ecuador with food baskets, medicines, medical assistance, and help with funeral needs for the deceased. The work in India is done by Father Antonio's organization, St. Mary's. In Ecuador, the work is being done by the Servant Sisters of the Home of Mother. You can call us at 877-762-8857. To learn more, please visit our website, www.helpthehelpless.org. God bless you. This is Terry Barber. I want to thank you for supporting Virgin Most Powerful Radio. And here's an easy way to support us by going to smile.amazon.com and type in Catholic Resource Center or Virgin Most Powerful Radio. And when you log in your Amazon account and you purchase products, a portion of it will go right back in supporting Virgin Most Powerful Radio. And it doesn't cost you a dime. I want to thank you ahead of time because that supports us year-round. May God bless you and your family. Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites the Terry and Jesse Show. And they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow! That's 80%! realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE-US1.
This is Jesse Romero. You're listening to Hands-On Apologetics with Gary Machuda on Virgin Most Powerful Radio.
And welcome back, everybody. We're chatting with Eric Ybarra about the Pope and the Council of Nicaea. And right before the break, Eric brought up the Meneon, which is a liturgical document that speaks about Pope Sylvester and suppressing the Arian heresy and calling the council. I didn't know that it does that. How old is the Meneon?
You know, I'm not. It's still going because they continue to add things to it.
Okay.
So it really is a compilation of what writings were known before the ecumenical council started, but also with, I guess, the recollections that were passed down through oral tradition. It took time for hymnography to become part of the Byzantine tradition. So I would guess, and this is just a rough estimate, and I'm no expert in the dating of the Meneon, I want to say probably around the 8th, 9th century, which is, significantly after the Council of Nicaea. But I bring it up as one of the corroborative elements because this is coming from the east. It's not really coming from the west, and that kind of adds some extra reliability to what history they had because Nicaea is in the east.
Yeah. I actually like that approach. I like to, whenever you're looking at something where there's not a lot of surviving documents, sometimes it's good to look at history going anachronistically backwards so that you read the later writings first, and then you can kind of see where things that are more subtle and earlier ones kind of jump out at you.
Yeah, and the Meneon's more closer to the edge of the evidence, but we do have other elements closer to, like, for example, the Council of Constantinople that was held in the 7th century, 681. Excuse me. At that council, there's a section in the actions of the council where they recount the prior 5 councils, and they give a little brief history on how those councils were convened. And so, they talk about the Pope Leo and Emperor Marcian, who convened the 4th council, the famous Chalcedonian Council. But when it came to Nicaea, they mentioned Sylvester and Constantine.
Wow.
Which is, interesting, a little bit earlier than the Meneon, I would say, and openly in an act of an ecumenical council. Now, historians don't take that with a lot of weight because they're looking at primary documents, 7th centuries, quite a long time afterwards. But again, it shows where Easterners were thinking at the time, whether they were recollecting from documents that we don't have access to, or whether that was just the telltale. It's still significant to mention. And I guess the thing that we have that's closest to the Council of Nicaea is the historians Sozomen and Socrates. They're writing 100 years after the council, about a little bit more, around 445. And they don't explicitly mention that Pope Sylvester convened the council, but they do mention the order in which the representatives signed the decree at the end. And the first one to sign was Hosius of Cordoba, who's a Western bishop from Spain, who's a significant figure. I'll talk about him in a little bit. But right underneath him is the papal legate of Rome. And then after that, you have the Patriarch of Alexandria, which is the second see of Christendom, and then you have Antioch after that. So what that tells you is that the council knew the pecking order in a sense. Now Hosius of Cordoba, being a bishop from the Hispania region, would call the question, well, why aren't the papal legates over him? Well, it's quite possible that Hosius was representing the Pope. That's a possibility. The documentary extent doesn't give us that, but there's certainly corroborative evidence for that. And so right there at the council, I think, recounting from those historians, you see the papal legates, at the very least, are the first assigned before the heads of the Eastern churches. So that's significant.
So would Hosius be considered a legate? Would it
well,
just,
he would yeah, so he wouldn't be considered a legate of the Church of Rome. However, it's very possible that he was acting in a sense as representative of the West in cooperation with the Pope. And we know that because of certain things that happened after the Council of Nicaea. And but at the very least, we know that there were bishops who acted in the stead of the Pope that were not legates, like at the Council of Ephesus in 431. St. Cyril of Alexandria acted as a representative, but not specifically as a legate. That's a more fine position. But, once the council condemns the doctrine of Arius and supposedly victory is made, the history after the council is kind of sad, because not everybody's in agreement with the council. Before the ink dried on the papyrus, it's quite likely that some bishops that were even there started to doubt the word homoousios, meaning equal, co-substantial of between Father and Son in nature. And so you have the beginnings of the Arian controversy, which is more prominent after the Council of Nicaea than it is before it, ironically. And so you have, the Arian controversy is really, it's just a small flame before the Council of Nicaea, and then after the Council of Nicaea it turns into a wildfire. And I think it's in reaction to that wildfire that we see the prominence of the papacy. And that probably gives us, a corroborative evidence for, the role of the papacy in the Council of Nicaea itself. And it all centers on one man, and we all know this man, Saint Athanasius the Great. And he is called into question in the East, not per se about his doctrine, but about certain scandalous accusations that occurred in his life, but for which evidence was not enough in the eyes of an unbiased court to condemn him with. But nevertheless, Athanasius runs into a lot of trouble with the court bishops under the Eastern Emperor Constantius, who followed Constantine after his death. But even while Constantine was alive, Athanasius was running into trouble with these Eastern bishops who deposed him at a council in a little town called Tyre. That was in 335. So this is just about 10 years after the Council of Nicaea. And this fiasco led to Rome entering into the battle scene, you could say. The semi-Arian bishops that condemned Athanasius themselves wrote to the Pope at the time, Julius, in order to have another trial for Athanasius. But when they found out that Athanasius was going to Rome as well, they backed out of the whole situation, and it sort of left the Pope having to listen to Athanasius' side, and in the absence of his interlocutors in the East. And the Pope waited for about a year, and then finally he annulled the Council of Tyre, which had deposed Athanasius, and that was a bold move. That was a bold move because in the East, at this time, they had convened a council which didn't allow appeals outside of your metropolitanate. So the fact that Athanasius made it all the way to Rome and received back his position, he got his job back as the Bishop of Alexandria by the Pope.
Right.
That caused a big problem because the Pope sent Athanasius back to the East with letters of restoration. And so the Pope expected the Easterners to pay attention to his signature. But that didn't happen, unfortunately. So, how are we on time with the break?
We got like 2 more minutes.
Okay. So right there you have the St. Athanasius bearing witness to the fact that whatever conciliar decisions can be made in the East, they are held accountable by the Bishop of Rome, and that they can be effectively overturned. And this happened with not just Athanasius, but other Eastern bishops as well. And there was 5 with Athanasius that went back to the East with letters from the Pope. In any case, the semi-Arian bishops that were led by one of the court bishops, Eusebius of Nicomedia, one of the court bishops of Constantinople, they protested against this and said, you have no right to interfere with the affairs of the Eastern churches. And so what ended up happening then is the emperors decided to convene an ecumenical council in Sardica in order to resolve this tension that was building up. So at the time, the Arians had a view of papal primacy, but they didn't think it went to the extent of being able to overturn foreign councils. So at this Council of Sardica, you have Hosius of Cordoba, the very bishop that was the first to sign at Nicaea, at the Council of Sardica as the leading president. Again, but it's very clear that the Pope is the one who is the primate over this Western delegation. So that's one of the reasons why I say Hosius was probably under Sylvester back when the Council of Nicaea started.
Yeah, very good. We were chatting with Master Apologist Eric Ybarra about the Pope and the Council of Nicaea. Great information. More to come on the other side of the break. You're listening to Hands on Apologetics. Stay tuned, folks.
Christ's message of love, mercy, and compassion is for all of humanity. The Last Days, the Passion and Death of Jesus the Christ, is a live passion play being performed in Los Angeles and is an opportunity to get up close and personal to Jesus Christ during this season of Lent. Hi, I'm Jonathan Rumi, and I play Jesus Christ, and I'd like to invite you to join us on April 4th, 5th, and Good Friday, April 10th, at Emmanuel Presbyterian Church in Koreatown for this special presentation. If you're not able to attend the play in person, please consider supporting the ministry by making a donation to help us ensure Christ's message is brought to the world through the arts. For more information, again, go to www.thelastdayspassionplay.com and find, follow, and share us on social media, on Instagram @The Last Days of Jesus, and on Facebook @The Last Days of Jesus Passion Play. Thank you so much, and God bless.
Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites the Terry and Jesse Show. And they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow! That's 80%! realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE-US1.
This is Jesse Romero. You're listening to Hands On Apologetics with Gary Machuda on Virgin Most Powerful Radio.
And welcome back, everybody. We're chatting with Eric Ybarra about the Papacy and Nicaea, and Eric's giving a clinic. If you're just tuning in, you want to go to our podcast, listen to the first couple segments, because lots of great information. And Eric, right before the break, you were talking about how Athanasius went to Rome, and Rome intervened with papers to reinstall him as bishop, and that this intervention occurs other times in the East. And certainly that evidences the fact that Athanasius and these other bishops believed that the Pope certainly had the authority to reinstall him and nullify the actions in the East, right?
Yeah. So just to get a resume on the canvas here, you've got the Council of Nicaea that just closed. Arius is supposedly condemned. But in the East, there's this vague and ironic attempt to rehabilitate Arius and some sort of modified view about whether the Son is like the Father, equal to the Father, or similar to the Father. And Athanasius comes under the limelight, is condemned by many Eastern bishops for disciplinary accusations that had no basis. And Rome comes in and is overturning decisions of councils in the East. And the East, certain bishops in the East, particularly the semi-Arian bishops led by Eusebius of Nicomedia, they raise a flag. And so the emperors realize that there's a tension here. They convene the Council of Sardica. And at Sardica, you have a Western delegation of bishops, and you have an Eastern delegation of bishops. And Sardica is in modern-day Sofia, Bulgaria. So just to get the geography clear, kind of in the East. And at this council, they just sort of, number one, they say that the Pope was right to restore Athanasius because he was a Nicene Christian. Number two, the Pope has a right to hear appeals from anywhere in the world. Number three, if the Pope judges that each condemned bishop has a potential for retrial, he could overturn or reopen, rather, the case so that it could be reexamined by proximate judges or one of his own legates that he sends himself. And that's Canons 3, 4, and 5 at the Council of Sardica. And interestingly enough, they state as the basis for this that the Bishop of Rome is the head of all the churches, because it's the see of the Apostle Peter, which is interesting because this is in 343 AD, about 40 years before some bishops in Constantinople try to say that the Bishop of Rome was primate because it was home to the emperor, which that's a whole nother history. It's kind of a mess. But here, 40 years before this, you have this ecumenical council in Sardica saying that the Pope has the right to do these things because he occupies the throne of St. Peter. Now, when the semi-Arian bishops who were invited to the council heard that Athanasius was going to start from the first day as a member of the council and not as a condemned person on trial, they refused to participate. And so they left the council and convened their own little gig in Antioch against the council and against the Pope. And but the Council of Sardica still went on with its own decrees, and there were bishops from the East there, from even the Far East, that were there. And so that council had Athanasius, Hosius of Cordoba, again, Hosius being the number one president there that recognizes the primacy of the Pope in all episcopal trials. anywhere in the world. There's no limitation in terms of the space, the geographical extent. And so you have the sort of like the dawn of the canonical primacy of Rome entering into both East and Western spheres. And none of them think that this is an innovation, but something that goes back. So this is why I say there's events after the Council of Nicaea which illuminate what must have been the case during the council. And certainly in order to get the council off the ground, because as soon as the council was done, the East fumbled a lot, and come to find out, the emperors were taking a stronghold on even the Pope, Pope later that came was Liberius, who came after Julius. Julius died in perfect peace, but Liberius came, and he was confiscated, he was put under duress and persecution in order to question the Council of Nicaea. And, Athanasius lives a longer life, and he defends Liberius because of the persecution that was launched by the emperors and many of the Eastern bishops that were trying to rehabilitate Arianism or some form of Arianism. And it wasn't until Pope Damasus and Theodosius II where Nicaea finally is planted on its 2 feet and it's ready to walk.
Interesting. Yeah. So, yeah, fantastic history. So what's the status of Sardica in terms of how the Orthodox look at it today?
Yeah, so I was saying ecumenical because that's certainly how the letters, the planning letters, referred to it as. They thought it was going to be like another Arles and another Nicaea. Ecumenical was more of a loose term then than we use it later, But those semi-Arian bishops that didn't participate, that kind of lost the number of the bishops representing. So it went down to like 90, is what Athanasius says is in the council there. The Orthodox accept this council, however, because the Eastern Orthodox, they don't identify with the semi-Arian bishops of the East. They identify with Athanasius, So yeah. Certainly, they accept the Council of Sardica. There's appeals to it in as early as 361, 394, 449 with Eutyches of Constantinople, and then finally at the Council of Trula, 692, they explicitly mention Sardica as a Byzantine council. It's part of Byzantine canonical law.
Interesting. Well, if it's so explicit about the Pope's extension of jurisdiction, the question is why doesn't it have as big of an impact on Orthodox theology, or does it?
Yeah, so it does have an impact because with the Orthodox Church, there's plenty of views now. There's 50 shades of gray when it comes to primacy. You've got you got your Orthodox Papists, and then you've got your Orthodox Conciliarists, and there's everything in between. So they look back at this, and they'll, Orthodox Papists would say, yes, we believe Rome was first. Yes, we believe Rome was primate. Yes, we believe he had authority. Yes, he could be appealed to, but it was not of divine institution, and it was not immediate universal. He had to get the permission of the bishops that were in question in order to have the trial reopened and examined by him personally. Okay. And so it's a little bit of a finer legal distinction in there. And so, the Catholic Church would say, no, his jurisdiction is universal and immediate because he didn't receive that from a council. The Church didn't give him this assignment. He was given that assignment directly from the King of Kings in the person of St. Peter. And so because the grant was given by the King of Kings to Peter and his successors, there can't be any permission. He doesn't need the permission of inferiors in order to act on his responsibility as a universal primate. Yeah. And so this is where this debate goes, and so you have a lot of Orthodox Papists who, and I say that, I know it sounds wrong. A lot of my Orthodox friends know I don't mean any harm by this. I just mean that there's Orthodox out there who have a very high view of the Roman primacy, but they think that it went just a stretch or an inch too far. And so for them, that's one of the reasons why they don't accept it. But historically, in recent history, the Orthodox have not been so easy to make that kind of concession. They usually want to fall back on the idea that he had a primacy, but that one was purely of honor, influence, and prestige, but not jurisdiction. So I would say the Catholic gloss on it is more accurate, but I do want to say that there's stuff to be said for the Orthodox criticism.
Yeah, very good. Man, I tell you, I've learned a lot, Eric. I thought I knew this subject pretty well, but you brought out some really good points. Where can people go to, read your writings, and also where can they go to check out your stuff on Reason and Theology?
Yeah, so ericYbarra.org is where you'll see latest articles. I just did a couple of videos on Reason and Theology answering Eastern Orthodox objections, where I try as best as I can to charitably answer some of the common objections. You can go to Reason and Theology on YouTube, where we have a host of different theological items that come up. I know that we've got some exciting videos coming up soon. I have a book that's close to being finished on the papacy, shaping the debate between Orthodoxy and Catholicism. And from there, I'll probably go on to another to do with the papacy. I'm looking forward to it. And then the Reason and Theology itself is I show up probably about once a week. So it's a really good show, and I really appreciate Michael Lofton for that, for starting it and for getting me involved. And also, if the listeners were curious, because I know sometimes you can get people from anywhere in the world listening here. We mentioned the Meneon at the beginning of the show. I didn't mention the specifics. It's January 2nd is the day that St. Sylvester falls on. So if any of you guys have access to a monastery, because a Meneon is pretty large, unless you're lucky to have one in your house, you could also access it online and see the explicit content about Pope Sylvester at that time.
Very good. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. We really appreciate it.
Oh, I thank you. The pleasure was all mine.
Yep, that's Eric Ybarra, folks. Check it out, ericYbarra.org. And also, great videos put out by reasonandtheology.com. You can check it out on YouTube. Just great stuff. Avail yourself of it. Great information. And talk about great information coming up next. High Impact Catholic Talk coming at you with the Terry and Jesse Show. Man, it's hard to believe the hour is flown. It's time for me to shut down the Midwest Command Center here and turn off the Gojo lights. Thank you so much for tuning in, and God willing, we will talk again tomorrow. Bye-bye, everybody. Have a great day.
In the 1990s, I lived and worked in Hollywood. But when my wife Betty's mom took ill, we relocated to Orange County. And it was during this time in our lives that I converted to Catholicism. Once my eyes were opened to the truth, I couldn't learn enough about the faith. But I had less free time than ever, especially with a long commute. That's when I discovered the real value of Catholic audio. Listening to cassette tapes transformed my daily commute into a miniature retreat. And that's the beauty of Virgin Most Powerful Radio today. Since the podcasts are archived, you can listen anytime on our smartphone app. I know how listening to Catholic audio can bring you closer to Christ and His Church. So I encourage you to visit the App Store or go to vmpr.org and download the app today. It just might change your life. I'm Matthew Arnold for Virgin Most Powerful Radio.
Virgin Most Powerful Radio, sharing the gospel with clarity and charity.
I'm a